Hi, sorry for the slight delay. We were having some technical issues. You can see here on the instructions for submitting forms for ASHA CEUs that the deadline for it says here that it's April 18th, 2017. Obviously, that's not correct. If you're listening to this live webinar on April 11th, 2018 and would like to earn ASHA CEUs, you have until April 18th, 2018 to submit the forms to the address shown on this slide to Darlene Davis here at Pearson. Those forms were on your reminder email, and you'll also be able to find them at the place where you registered for the webinar. The forms, be sure and complete both the participant form and the evaluation form. And if you have more than one person at your location, you can download the attendance sheet and have each person seeking CEUs sign that form and return it to us. If you're the only person at your site, you do not need the attendance form. No CEUs are offered for the recording of the session that's available on our website. That being out of the way, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Kathleen Williams.
Thank you, Nancy. And let's see. Oh, this is nice. We did ask at this time to see who was going to be listening to me today, and it looks like most of you are speech pathologists, which is where I started life. So we have common ground to begin with. So we're going to talk about building vocabulary across quite a wide age range, grades 1 through 8. We have a few things that we have to get out of the way first. First, I'd like you to know who you're listening to. I'm thinking some of you did tune in to my webinar that was a couple of weeks ago, but if you did not, here's who you're listening to. I was a person out there working with kids for over 20 years as a speech pathologist, classroom teacher, and school psychologist. And then some may say I went to the dark side, but I left public schools and went to work for first the Psychological Corporation, where I got to meet Nancy and work with Nancy. And then I went and worked for AGS, American Guiding Service. And from there, I went and was the Vice President of Test Development for the College Board. Now I am kind of retired. And what I do is this. I do workshops for directly in schools and webinars like this one. Yes, I started life as a speech pathologist. I have a degree in elementary education as well. And looks like I kept going to school like I wanted to keep going to school, but don't we all just love getting education? So I have to give you my disclosure because you're receiving CEUs for this presentation. The assessments and materials that you see listed at the top are materials that I do receive royalties for. And the materials at the bottom, I actually authored all those materials when I was at AGS, and at that time AGS was an employee-owned company, an ESOP, so therefore I didn't get to get royalties on those assessments. Now all of that is owned by Pearson, since Pearson now owns both AGS and the Psychological Corporation, and that will continue and get into the content of this. Okay, what are you supposed to get out of this today? Well, this is what I'm going to try to present to you over the next hour. I'm going to give you some research about the importance of a rich and broad knowledge basis of vocabulary and why that's important throughout a person's life. Today we're talking about that grade span of 1 through 8. And as many of you know, we broke this presentation up about vocabulary development into 3 segments, the first being preschool, the last being teenagers advancing on to college or work, and that left in the middle our primary and middle school students. And I thought that made sense at first, and then I had to think, well, how can I present material to you, ideas to you, that would be applicable whether you're in 1st grade or 8th grade? So I looked through my idea bank and my research, and I hope you like what I have to present to you today. I hope you can build on the ideas that I give you today, and most importantly, I hope these are ideas, since the majority of you who are listening are speech pathologists. I hope in your consultant role to classroom teachers that you will be able to share these ideas with the teachers, because When it comes to developing vocabulary, we are all in this together. You can't do it in a therapy session 1 day a week, 3 days a week, whatever it is. You need partnerships with parents and teachers. And many of the ideas that I'm going to share with you today are ideal for sharing with teachers. And so you can say that you're doing a team approach to helping children develop that all-important vocabulary that they need to succeed in the classroom. This is our agenda. I'm going to talk about research, and I'm going to talk about interventions. The breakdown will probably be more emphasis on interventions than research. I'll give you ideas of where you can follow up with the research, but I know that you're tuning in to find out, what can I do differently this afternoon? What can I do differently tomorrow to help my students, to help my clients develop a good vocabulary? So we're going to start, if you were with me a couple weeks ago, we're going to start where we started last time. We're going to say, what do I mean when I say we're going to talk about vocabulary? We're talking about an individual's lexical store. That is your mental dictionary of words and idioms. And as I mentioned before, I consider an idiom the same way I consider a word, because when you know what an idiom means, like raining cats and dogs, you know that as a complete concept. That means it's raining very hard. Part of your lexical store may be accurate, but a good part of it may be rather inaccurate or incomplete. That part of your lexical store that tends to be sort of incomplete is your receptive vocabulary. And your receptive vocabulary, I like to think in terms of breadth and depth when we consider receptive vocabulary and expressive vocabulary. Your receptive vocabulary, the vocabulary you use, what you're using right now to listen to me, and the vocabulary you use when you're reading, has a lot of breadth to it. Your expressive vocabulary, the one you use when you're speaking or writing, tends to have more depth to it. And what I mean by that is, when I speak or when I write, I need to be very precise with my word usage. Because if I use a word right now incorrectly, you're not going to understand what I'm saying. When we use our vocabulary to comprehend when we're listening or when we're reading, a lot of that vocabulary isn't 100% complete. But we can use the context, we can use the background information, we can use other sources of information to complete our understanding of each word or concept that we read or we hear. We're certainly not talking about the number of words one can decode. A lot of kids can decode words, but they don't know what the meaning of those words are. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Since we're talking about grades 1 through 8, we're going to go into more depth about decoding and understanding in this session. Certainly, we talked about this last time, and I do want to repeat it. These differences that we have between receptive and expressive vocabulary skills. And I've talked about them a little bit, talking about how we seem to handle a receptive situation better than an expressive situation. Those are the children who seem to score higher on the PBBT than the EBT. And I'm talking about significantly higher. Those are kids that, like we said, that I've said, they have a really good background knowledge, and they can fill in the blanks. When you develop anything that you want to test children on receptively, now I'm going to put on my hat as a test author, you always have to make sure that you're using vocabulary that a child would have the opportunity to learn. That's an important phrase to remember when you review materials that you put in front of a child in a receptive format. Child should have an opportunity to learn the meaning of those words. And so when you choose vocabulary for a test like PBBT, you choose words that, for want of a better expression, seem like middle road America. Now, I have to say, I hesitated to say white middle America, because I'm not sure what that is in our country anymore. I think we're becoming much, much more diverse, and I think you all see that as in the people that you work with, in your clients, and in your schools. But when you are holding a subject and examining in a receptive format, you have to make sure that the vocabulary you're using, there would have been that opportunity to learn. And if the child has been read to a great deal, has this strong knowledge of the prevailing culture, a broad experiential background, gets to go to zoos and museums, there's a likely chance that in that breadth of the receptive lexicon, within that receptive lexical store, the child might have some partial knowledge, enough to guess and do well on a test like PPVT. Now, there are other children that you work with, you see them scoring higher in the EVT. And I always have people ask me, well, how is this possible? That doesn't sound like it's possible. Listening is easier than speaking. Well, it really isn't for half of our population. And for half of our population, not only do they score higher on a test where the child's allowed to speak or write, some of them have a significant difference. And a lot of that has to do with automaticity, being able to work at your own pace, and this idea of a different background. So if you're dealing with children whose background you don't think is that white, middle-of-the-road American, whatever the heck that is, make sure that you're also looking at that child from an expressive point of view, from a speaking or writing point of view. And since I did this last presentation, I had an incident right